I think this should be going now. So today what I'm going to be doing is not menu and UI stuff like I said last night. Instead, I woke up this morning and I realized that there was a problem that I've known about for some time, dealing with input and gamepads and button glyphs, and I realized that I could come up with a fairly elegant way to solve it, hopefully for any device ever. So what I'm going to be doing today is I have a PS2 DualShock 2 controller here connected to my PC through an adapter that I'm not going to be able to show on camera because the cord isn't going to stretch that far. But it's a 3-in-1 adapter that can connect a GameCube, Xbox, or PS2 controller to a PC. So I'm using that to test this thing today, and I think I'll just go ahead and jump into the game and show y'all what happens when I do this. So let's see, I can go into the options menu, go into controllers. So this is how the controller shows up on here. It's this multi-controller adapter. If I set it to the default button glyph set and go to the bindings, you'll see that it's showing numbered button glyphs because the engine understands that this is a direct input device. It doesn't know, based on the product ID or vendor ID, that this is actually a PlayStation controller that I'm using, so it doesn't know on its own that it needs to use those glyphs. But I do have this feature where I can just choose a glyph stud, so I can choose that and come back to bindings, and it shows the glyphs I would expect, and they are in the order that I expect here. You know, jump should be bound to the X button, primary melee attack should be square, etc. But if I go back into the game, what happens here, I don't know how well you can see this on the webcam, but I'm pressing X here to jump, and it throws a bomb instead. And I press square to do my primary attack, and it throws my sub-weapon instead. So what's happening is that the button glyphs are associated with button numbers. So on a direct input device, you have, you know, button 0, button 1, button 2, and so on. Or I guess they start at 1. They're indexed from 1, so it's buttons 1, 2, 3, and 4. But there's no standard, no convention for how those numbers map to positions on the facepad here. The conventions that my engine uses are based on Logitech devices. So, you know, a vast majority of direct input devices out in the wild are Logitech gamepads, and that seemed like a good default. But not every device is going to be the same, and, you know, connecting a PS2 controller through an adapter was a good way to test this. So there are probably thousands of devices out there in the wild, and given enough time and money, I could conceivably buy and test every device ever, and, you know, add some hard-coded remappings to my engine so that it knows, like, oh, if you're using this particular controller, then the buttons on the faceplate need to be remapped this way. But I don't have that time, I don't have that money, and what I figured I would do instead is add a wizard to the game. So that's what I'll be doing today. I'm going to add a wizard so that you can, along with selecting the button glyph set that you want, it will prompt you, you know, press the button on your controller that corresponds to X, or square, or circle, or whatever. And you'll go through the entire gamepad and press all the buttons and inputs that match with those, and it will, under the hood, save off all those remappings, associate those with the vendor ID and product ID of the device that you're using, and save those off, so, you know, the next time you launch the game using the same device, you know, you can just load those up and have all of your button mappings exactly as they should be. So hopefully that will, you know, once and for all get rid of any problems where, you know, you're using a device and it's not a Logitech device, it's not following their particular conventions, and you go like, why aren't these buttons working the way I think they should? So yeah, hopefully this feels like a fairly appropriately scoped task for a stream. I can probably knock this out in an hour or two, but, you know, there might be some unexpected surprises, so we'll see how it goes. The first thing I'm going to do is, I guess, add a new menu for this wizard. So what I call the joysticks menu in my engine is that menu where you can choose a device and choose your button glyphs as well. So I will add a sub menu that launches from there, and that will launch this wizard. Let's see if I remember how this works. My menuing code is very, very old and a little difficult to work with, and somehow I feel like I always end up having to deal with it anytime I do a development stream. So I apologize for that. Let's see, there's the devices label. Somewhere in here I should have. Here's the spinner for the glyph set. So I will add another button here. Go ahead and copy all of this. Let's see, set text. I want that to go through my localization. Set this, I guess, a little bit below wherever the other one was. Hopefully this isn't overlapping with anything. It would be nice if I had sort of like a, you know, flow control sort of thing where I could just like throw a bunch of buttons into a list and it would automatically position them. But I don't have that, so instead I position all of the buttons and stuff in the menu by hand, and it's kind of a pain. Yeah, that should be good. Probably should not be building in final release here because that means it takes longer to link everything. Though if I compile and debug, then you're going to see a lot of asserts because the procedural generation is a little bit broken right now. But in the interest of not having to sit through long link times, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Yeah, definitely. This is ridiculous. It's one of those things where I don't really notice how long it takes to compile a build until I'm like sitting there with dead air. done yet? There. Okay, now it's done. So all that should do is add a new button to the joysticks menu. That doesn't do anything yet, but it will soon. And I can also make sure this doesn't overlap anything. Oh, it is overlapping something. So I'll need to shift that back button down a little bit and yeah, make room for the tuna. So back button is at the height of 672. That one was, shift that one up a little bit further. And then I'm switching over to debug so we don't have to deal with the long link times. The only reason the link and code generation times are so long is because for final release builds, I don't do what they call it, like iterative builds or whatever, where so basically it has to throw everything out and rebuild everything from scratch, which helps ensure a cleaner build, but it also takes a lot longer. Of course, now you're going to see some asserts that don't really mean a whole lot right now, but yeah. I guess also it takes longer to start up in debug builds, but yeah. Alright, so let me make sure I have enough space on there now. Alright, there. I don't like how those underlays are overlapping, but whatever, I can deal with that later. So now we have the button there to launch the Glyph wizard. Now I'll go actually make it do something. So when you click on a button, let's see. It's been so long since I've implemented new menus, I just forgot this. Alright, so that's what we're doing. And then I'll go ahead and actually add that new menu. There we go. There's menus. All right. I guess for starters, I'll go ahead and copy this menu from the binding menu because that's going to be the closest to what I want this thing to look like. And all these. So the way the binding menu works is basically it just asks you to press a button. Whatever button you press, it saves it off as the control that you've requested to bind. So this is going to be very similar to that, except that rather than trying to bind a particular control, it's going to just run through a list of glyphs, wait for you to press a button in response to each one, and make some note of that. Probably also it will watch for the escape button to cancel out of it, and I don't know, maybe any other sorts of things. In the binding menu, I use backspace to, I guess, clear bindings and reset them to default. But yeah, otherwise this should be fairly similar. I don't need a special constructor for this one. I don't remember what the suppress input because binding does, but I may want that. I guess mostly it's used to prevent the console from being opened if you press the tilde button while you're in the binding menu. I'm not sure exactly why I wouldn't want that, or not want that. I don't know. I don't remember if you can rebind that one. It may have been one of those things where for Japanese keyboards, the tilde button was like not a good choice for opening the console. I had to do some sort of working around that, but it's been a long time since I looked at that, so I don't know. Let's see. And what for starters? Deal with any of that yet. I don't remember what that found flag. Oh, right. Actually, yeah, I may want something like that in the future. That was to prevent any sort of redundant inputs. I shouldn't need the backspace thing in this one. And I don't necessarily need that one, although I do want to watch for what's happening there. See if this even compiles. Alright, now this should just, when we click on the Glyph wizard button, it should give us a menu that just says test, 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 and responds to any button input by hitting the breakpoint that I set. So, we'll see. So, make sure it's still using these. Glyph wizard, test, test, test. I'm going to hit the X button, and nothing happened. Why didn't? Oh, whoops. So it just responded to the mouse movement there. I'm not sure why it wasn't responding to the X button. But if I look at the out input here, yeah, it's going to say. It was an axis. Which axis? It was the mouse X axis. Right, so it was reacting to me moving the mouse to try to close the window. Actually, you know what? Do bindings even work here? Okay, I'll set jump button and try to set that to X. So that's not even working. In fact, nothing on this controller is working. Why not? Oh, somehow it switched me back to the Xbox 360 controller. What the heck? Oh. Goodness. See, this is why my menuing system is terrible. Because I forget that I have hard-coded button indices that need to be updated. Let's see. Get selected as greater than 2, I guess, because now I'm putting the spinner. Yeah, so the wizard is button 2. Device index is going to be get selected -3. Alright, there we go. That's embarrassing. That's definitely the best code I've ever written. No, there was a time my menu system could only reference buttons by index, so I would have to know, like, okay, this was the first button I added, this was the second button I added, and then reference those by index. I added this control name thing, so I could just say, okay, I have a button that has this purpose, you know, associated with it, which is why here I said, like, set the control name to wizard, and then down here it just watches for any button that's, you know, has that control name wizard, so it can open the menu. But for things where I have like lists of items and stuff that may have, you know, any various number of buttons associated with them, sometimes I still reference things by index, and yeah, that's how that sort of thing ends up happening. So what was happening there was when I launched the Glyph wizard, or at some point in there, it ended up selecting the X input controller that I also have attached as the active input. So it wasn't responding to the PS2 controller because it didn't think that that was the active device. So, yeah, okay. Good. Now I can click on those, and those work as expected. Launch Glyph wizard. I'm going to press the X button again. Oops, did I get rid of that breakpoint? I did get rid of the breakpoint. Let's try that again. Alright, launch Glyph wizard, press the X button, hit the breakpoint, look at out input. We hit a button. What button did we hit? It was a button on the joystick. Which button? It was button 2. So is that what I expect? So buttons are indexed from 0 in my engine, so starting on triangle it'd be 0, 1, 2, so that is the button that we expect to have hit. So yeah, that all seems to be working as expected. So now what we need to do is basically have the wizard spin through a list of button glyphs, wait for a response for each of those, or if we hit escape, I guess we cancel out the whole thing. I'll need to figure out what that case will be. And figure out also how to handle the case of, like, you press the same button in response to 2 different glyphs. Does it, you know, flag that as a warning? Does it allow that to happen? But yeah, then basically make those remappings. And then this is only going to affect visuals. It's not going to affect how the buttons are actually bound under the hood. So, you know, button 2 on one device may be different from button 2 on a different device, and that's fine. All that we need to do in this case is show the appropriate glyph. Now what that does mean is that, like, once I've made those remappings, I'll come here into the bindings and it'll say, like, jump is on triangle or whatever. Is that right? Yeah. Jump will be on some other button. The primary attack will be on, you know, circle or whatever. And these will be sort of, you know, not in the order that I would want, but, you know, then you can just come in here and make the changes to the bindings. So there is still going to be a problem where the default bindings that the game ships with aren't going to be what you would expect for your particular device. I could maybe try to fix that up by saying, like, okay, if we have this remapping, then not only do we show, or I guess instead of showing a different glyph, we actually interpret the input differently. But that feels a little riskier. For now, I'm just going to allow this to be strictly a change to the visuals, a change to which glyph is shown, in response to a particular numerical button. So, given all that, I guess now I need to figure out how to make the list of glyphs that we want to spin through. So the button glyphs are I think I specify those in here. Yeah, so the glyphs are sort of represented by this markup here that is gross and awful and looks like XML except without the closing slashes, and I don't remember why I did that way. But yeah, I guess I have a few different glyphs there, and those actually get associated with okay, I'm glad I put that note there. These are old and bad. New ones are in content source. Okay, good. Let's see. Alright, so for instance, here's my button glyphs for the PlayStation controller. And then if I recall correctly, those are... yeah, so I have a PlayStation glyphs file here. I don't know why this still says Xbox Glyph Helper. I guess I just never renamed that. But this basically defines, or this basically maps the text that I have in this markup here. It associates that with positions in this texture map. Oh right, and the reason it's Xbox Glyph Helper is because I use the Xbox button names as sort of the defaults, because when I started developing my engine years and years ago, it was like X input only, and then slowly I started bringing in direct input devices and all that. But yeah, historically it all started with X input, so that's the names that I use as defaults. But yeah, so basically this just takes this markup that I have in here and associates it with positions on the texture map. So all of this remap is going to be doing is most likely just sort of remapping these names, or remapping positions. I'm not exactly sure where the best place, what the best thing to actually remap there is, but I guess I'll kind of figure that one out as I go. In any case, what this does tell me is why are back and start coming together? Oh, right, because back and start don't necessarily apply to the DualShock 4. Instead, you have the touchpad button, all that other stuff. So there may be some extra sort of one-off work that I need to do to handle specific controllers, but we'll see. I guess I'll start with this set. Maybe XY. What else? What I need to do? Okay, there. And let's see. ABXY, D-pad, up, down, left, right. Left stick directions, right stick directions. Bumpers, back start, or not bumpers, analog stick clicks, back start, bumpers and triggers. Okay. Should just be able to do this. There we go. Probably do want that found flag that I had in there before. And that's just to prevent any sort of redundant inputs. In case you pressed escape at the same time as something else. Let's see. I'll add another label where it will show the glyph that you are currently trying to bind. Not bind really, but detect. I may not need that found thing here, except for like this one frame where it's getting new input. So I'm just going to increment that and immediately set that back, right? I don't know. We'll see. Now my expectation is it will show the markup associated with the glyph, and I'll press a button and it'll move to the next one, and I'll advance through all of those that way. So, oops. That might help if I didn't tell it to close the wizard when that happens. Actually, no. Glyph index is greater than or equal to the number of glyph names. Then we'll close it. That should work correctly. I'll probably need to come up with a solution too. You know, let's say you have like you know, like an NES gamepad or a Super NES gamepad connected to your PC. Something that doesn't have all of the buttons that you would find on something like a DualShock or an Xbox 360 controller. I'll need a way to opt out of associating a particular glyph with any button, because like, yeah, you just need a way to like skip that and go on to the next one. So, I don't know, maybe I'll use backspace for that, because historically I've used backspace as like a button that you can't bind that serves other purposes. So, we'll see. Alright, so A, B, X, Y, up, down, left, right, left stick, Y plus, Y minus, X minus, X plus, right stick, Y plus, X plus, left stick button, right stick button, back or select, start, left bumper, right trigger, right trigger. Okay, cool. So it spins through all those. Right now it's not doing anything yet, but it will be. I guess what I will do then is, what was the type of this out input thing? Defined input. Okay, so I will also have I'll also have an array of inputs of equal size. Hopefully this has a default constructor, just zeroes out its memory. So when you press a button, before it increments the index, it will say assigned inputs for Glyph index equals add input. It really does not like that. Let's see, where did I put this input button? So yeah, now basically it will save off whatever inputs you pressed in response to every one of those buttons, so then it can do something once it's done with all those. DXY, down, left, right. Whatever, I'm just going to hit random buttons. I probably need to add like a delay there, where after you pressed one button you cannot immediately hit another, because what happened was I was trying to push right on the analog stick for one of those, and then it ended up catching that on the next one too. So that's a good use case to be aware of. Anyway, so now I end up with this assigned inputs array, so I can see, yes, I assigned, a button. It was button number 2 to the first thing. Come in here and assign button number 0 to the 4th thing, and so on. So that's the information that I will actually use to what was I saying? That's the information that I actually use to remap these. While I'm thinking about it too, I'm also going to add the backspace condition in here. I'll do something with this later as far as like skipping to the next element. And there was something else I was thinking I wanted to, oh right, I also want to not update this glyph label every single time. There's no reason I need to do that. And by every single time I mean every single frame. Only need to do that when this is updated and when it starts. There we go. Okay, so let's see. What do I need to do next? Now that what the hell, right. It might help if I actually find that function anywhere. So now that I have all of these, timer thing, that was the other thing I need to do. And I'll say like, I don't know, 0.35 seconds. 0.35 seems to be my magic number where if I just need to pull a number out of a hat, it usually feels pretty good. So I'll say, let's see. Trying to remember how much I want to decrement this by every frame. I believe this would be engine delta time, right? Not affected by time, or true delta time. Yeah, I think that should be what I want. So many different delta times at this point. Yeah, maybe not. I don't use that in any other place. Engine delta time. Yeah, that seems like the more likely choice there. I won't use the input delay for hitting escape or backspace because there's really no reason to, but for this one, input delay has to be less than or equal to 0, and if it is, then I decided to fix input delay. So that should prevent that case of like, oops, I pressed something immediately after, just pressing another one. I'll see. I may need to play with that time a little bit. You don't ever want it to feel unresponsive, but you also don't want to catch inputs that were erroneous. So, we'll see how that feels. So A, B, X, Y. Oops. Yeah, so there I hit it too fast. Down, left, right. Yeah. 0.35 seconds is definitely too much. Maybe what I need to do is just make sure you didn't press the exact same thing you just pressed previously. Yeah, because that's definitely way too much. And it's actually missing inputs that I am deliberately trying to press. So, let's see, what do I want to do instead? Bring it down to like 0.05 seconds. That may be too small to where it doesn't even make a difference, but we'll see. And then I don't remember if I can do comparisons between these defined inputs. Do I implement I do implement an equality operator there. Okay, good. So if glyph index is greater than 0 and out input equals assigned inputs for glyph index -1, does not equal that, then we can go ahead and do this. So if you press the same thing twice in a row, then it's just going to ignore it. Is that right? No, that's not right either. If input delay is less than 0, or that case. So as long as the delay, and then I can actually raise the delay up a little bit, bring it up to like 0.2. So what that means is that if you press the same button within this time, it ignores that. Otherwise, any input at all is totally okay. That may not necessarily deal with the case of like, oops, I pressed the analog stick to the side, but then as I was releasing it, I moved it just far enough up or down that now the next input gets caught by that. So, if that turns out to be a problem, I can tweak this a little bit more, but I feel like that's sort of going off on a usability tangent when really I just need to get this feature working in the base case. Alright, so A, B, X, Y, up, down, left, right, plus, minus, X, left stick, right stick, back, start. Okay, so I do all the inputs there. I have all my data stored up in here, and now I can start remapping these. So let's see, how do I want to do this? Because typically the way these have been yeah, typically the way inputs have been bound to glyphs is through this input.txt file here, where, for instance, I have here we go. So here's all the Xbox glyphs, and the names here are just sort of based on the way the button flags work under the hood. But now essentially I'm wanting to use these same glyphs in response to different buttons. You know, actually, maybe it does make more sense to actually make this sort of a low-level change to how the input is processed rather than a visual thing. That might get a little confusing once I start thinking about, like, you know, what if I try to associate a button with an analog stick glyph? Is that going to necessarily translate correctly? It should be fine. Let's see. Or maybe this could even be something that lives more in the control binding system. That might be too high level at that point, though. See where all I use these defined inputs. Don't need to care about any of that. Yeah, I think what I might want to do is basically add a sort of low-level translation that happens somewhere within the input system that takes this defined input struct, which basically encapsulates one particular input press. It can be a button, it can be an axis, it can have speed associated with it, which basically just, for axes, it tells which direction it's moving. But yeah, I might just want some sort of translation that happens that says, oh, you know, like, you pressed this input, but because of this remapping, I know to translate this to this other thing instead. And that could potentially convert between buttons and axes, because buttons and axes in my engine sort of get ultimately can produce the same sort of output. You know, any input, whether it's a button or an axis, sends a value between 0 and 1. It's just with a button, it's 0 if it's unpressed, it's 1 if it's depressed. For an axis, it's that whole span there, along with like dead zones taken into account. Or actually, no, dead zones don't even come into account until a higher level area of code. So it might be possible to do that. Let's see, I have this input control. This is what is input control? I actually don't remember how this works. Oh, so yeah, a control deals more with like the game facing side of things of like, okay, I know that I have like some functionality for the game, like, you know, jump or primary melee attack, and you can associate some number of inputs with that. So this would probably make the most sense to do that sort of translation somewhere around here. Actually, maybe even a slightly lower level than this. Well, see if I can find all references to this inputs thing here, because I believe, actually, let me look this up again. In these input controls get created, I think when I, not like that, so I never actually allocate these. They must just live in a, like live in a vector somewhere. I don't know. Oh, right. So I have a named control, and it just has one of those. So let's see, control dot inputs. Yeah, that's what I'd be looking at there. I think those get created from register control. Yeah, register controls, and then I add an input for a control. So this is my default bindings, but these are not necessarily authoritative. Like, you know, if you go into the bindings and change them, these defaults that I specify here can get deleted and replaced with whatever you specify. So I don't have to consider those to be totally authoritative, which means that if I wanted to translate things in that space, that would probably make sense. Or maybe it would make the most sense to make this a part of the control system and say, you know, whatever control.inputs are, go ahead and do that translation when I'm reading from those or writing to those. How often do I reference this control.inputs? So this would be, yeah, this is where I add input for control. I need to figure out too, like, how is this remapping going to work? Because what I've provided is an input that's associated with a particular glyph, and that glyph is associated with an input only through this text file here. So I'm not actually sure there's really anything in code to help me sort of go from that glyph to the button that I would normally associate with that glyph. And two, because this is in a text file, this varies depending on whether you're running on Windows or running on Mac and Linux, because these inputs, like these things here on this side, are actually different. Like if I look at, you know, what's bound to Xbox D-pad up, you can see here it's 1, 2, 4, 8. It's powers of 2, whereas if I come over to the Mac and Linux version, it's, you know, indexed from 0, and it's just a counter that goes up. And that's just because of the way that X input deals with its button flags versus the way that SDL deals with its button numbers. So those are a little bit different. So if all I have is an input that's now associated with DP up, that doesn't necessarily give me anything to work backwards from. So I need to think about how I want to do that. And that's where it does feel like maybe it makes more sense to do this as sort of a visual only sort of change, where it's not fundamentally altering the input that comes in. How would I do that? Well, I guess what I could do is look and see like where do these things get assembled in input naming. So this is messy code. A lot of it is like if-deffed out between Windows and Mac and Linux versions. Yeah, you can see here like the button index when I'm dealing with X input is 1 left shifted by a value between 0 and n, where n is the number of buttons, whereas on Mac and Linux it's a number between 0 and SDL controller button X. So that's why there's the difference in those naming conventions there. I guess what I could do is maybe try to put the translation in this section. Let's see, what is UDEF? Oh, so this is actually happening within this defined input structure. It can just return a string representing its own name to look up in the through the localization manager. So yeah, maybe it does make the most sense to add that translation here. It still doesn't necessarily answer all of those questions, though. And this is where development streaming gets difficult, because it's like, well, I really just kind of need to like sit on this for a while and think about it. And I know that doesn't translate to entertaining viewing, but yeah. Maybe it doesn't actually make a difference how these are named. All that really matters is like, do I need to? But before any of this naming happens, I can just translate button indices to other button indices, or even translate between buttons and axes. And then the naming conventions should just kind of work as they already do. The one missing piece there is that I would need to know sort of the defaults. I would need to know what the button indices are for all the glyphs that I've defined up front here, which that's fine. Those should be the same, I think. Actually, let me make sure. Those are not the same. Because yeah, A, B, X, and Y are like, 4096, 8192. Whereas here it starts at 0. Nope, I have those all just in one file here. That makes things a little bit easier. How does that work then? So those indices are actually different. Maybe I actually have to set those up separately for Windows versus for Mac and Linux. I don't think I did. Where is it? Oh, right. That's what it is. I did have to set those up differently, but the trick that I used is I have these defines here. So on Windows, in x360A corresponds to x input gamepad A, which is, you know, this flag 1000, whereas on Mac and Linux, Mac and Linux, it corresponds to SDL controller button A, which is 0, I guess. So that's the abstraction that I'm doing between Windows versus Mac and Linux. So that should be fine then. I can, let's see. How many, do I have these defines anywhere else? Yeah, I guess just here. But yeah, I should be able to provide these values along with the glyphs in here, and then when I get results back, they'll correspond again to whichever platform I'm running on. And what that does mean is that your control bindings, when those get saved to file, that file is not going to translate between Windows and Mac and Linux. But that's, I don't really think, well, conceivably that could be an issue. Like, you know, if you have cloud saves on one platform and then you load those up on another platform, those are not going to match up. So, you know, theoretically I might want to abstract that out one layer further, and when I save and load control configs, have some translation there to say, okay, I know that I'm running on Windows, I know that I'm running on Mac and Linux, so I need to convert these values to some generic format that can be interpreted on load by the platform I'm running on. But that's getting really far out on another tangent there that I don't want to deal with just yet, but maybe I'll save that for a future development stream. For right now, let's see. I feel like there should be more of these for the analog sticks. I'm not sure where those are coming from. Where do I guess not. Apparently analog sticks are the same on any device. I'm a little bit wary of that, but who knows. That's right, though I do define X input separate from generic direct input devices. So, yeah. I guess this never became an issue between Windows and Mac and Linux. It does sort of raise the question, though, of, you know, if I'm asking for glyph inputs, I guess I need to know whether I'm looking for a generic joystick, a direct input device, or an X input device. But maybe I will worry about that later. Let's see. Oh, right, triggers. Triggers are also considered axes, so get rid of those. So that leaves me with what? 14 things there. Do I have 14 here? Yes, okay. So we'll go ahead and do then is I don't know what to call this yet. And what do I typically... just an integer. Alright, let's see. I guess I'll just call this glyph mapping for now. Alright, so instead of glyph names, I'll have glyph mappings. I guess I should add a constructor for this too. So, glyph mapping push. Oops. Mappings. Push. Glyph mapping A MX 360A. Alright. So then I'll do ABXY. D-pad up, down, left, right. Left stick, then these will be X, Y, shoulder. I guess I use shoulder and bumper inconsistently. Let's see, assigned inputs should match that. Set the text to that glyph name. And what else? Why am I still debugging? Okay. That should make more sense now, because now I have enough information once I've provided all of my own inputs to make that translation under the hood. I'll need to figure out how to deal with inputs. Right now all of these should be buttons, and maybe I'll just deal with buttons. It seems like axes are all working correctly anyway. I'm not 100% confident that would be true of any device ever, but apparently it hasn't been a problem yet. So let's see. A, B, X, Y, up, down, left, right stick, back, start, left bumper, right bumper. Okay, so now let's see. This assigned inputs, or wait, how many of these do I even have at this point? I have 14 now instead of 24, because I got rid of the axes. All the inputs I provided are all buttons, so that's nice. And yeah, so then what I should be able to do is So what I would also want to do here is assert that the input that I provided, I have a type here, make sure that I provided a button. If not, well, I have to do something different, but this should now give me enough information that I can go ahead and set up the translation stuff somehow. I apologize if those assert noises are very loud too. I actually have my speakers off, so I can't tell how loud they are. I had music going earlier. Why did the music stop? Now, as much as I like the V soundtrack, that's not what I was trying to play there. Sure, I guess we'll play some Superwind music. I don't know what iTunes is doing, it's being weird. Let's see. So, A, B, X, Y, up, down, left, right stick, back, start, left bumper, right bumper. Okay, so, let's just delete all those. So now, actually what I can do too is, let's see, theta plus I. There we go. Alright, so button A by default is 4096, which if I come and look at NX360A, it's X input gamepad A, which is, 1000, so that is, what I expect to see there. And I'm remapping that to the number 2, which hopefully makes sense in this context, we'll see. Actually, does that make sense? I don't know, we'll see. 2, 1, 3. Okay, so clearly the inputs that I've provided are direct input button indices, and the inputs I'm comparing them against are X input. So that's not what I want. You know what? So yeah, how many things do I bind to jump? Ah, here we go. So this is actually what I'm wanting, is EIB joystick 1. I'm going to have to figure out how to reconcile handling X input devices and direct input devices. However, for this wizard specifically, it seems like I really only need to care about direct input devices, which I call joystick buttons here. I have these notes here, index 0 is button 1, which I guess historically I treat it as X because that's, going back to what I was saying at the start of the stream, that's sort of the Logitech conventions. I guess you go, I think, counterclockwise from the left, so it'd be, 1, 2, 3, 4, or maybe it's 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't remember. I guess I can figure out here. Button 3 is B. Okay, so yeah, it goes counterclockwise from the left, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So these are actually the numbers that I would want to, wait, where was I? Those are the numbers that I would want to plug in here, not these NX360 things. So that would be 1, 2, 0, 3. The D-pad, let's see, where is that? confused. Right, so the D-pad actually is not treated as a button, it's treated as the POV hat by default, which that's going to be a little bit of a problem because at least one of these two adapters I'm using does not translate the D-pad to a POV hat. In fact, it's the one I have plugged in right now. If I go to Windows Game Controllers and take a look at what's happening here, you'll see as I spin around the D-pad here, it's showing that as buttons 13, 14, 15, and 16. Whereas if I were to use this other SmartJoy adapter, it would translate the D-pad to a POV hat, which is what my engine typically expects. Both of those can actually work correctly within my engine, but the default bindings aren't going to exist for this one. There are not going to be default bindings for buttons 13 through 16. And that also means that I am necessarily going to have to deal with converting between axes and buttons here. So, let's see. Maybe what I want to provide here is not an input index, but actually an entire defined input. Does this make sense? Well, we'll see. This may not make sense, but alright, so instead of saying that this is button 1, I would say this is in defined input. So I would be expecting joystick, and it would be joystick button 1. So then we'll do the same thing there and there. For the D-pad then, D-pad, this would be POV hat down. Of course, the POV hat actually does not have separate X and Y axes. It actually has, I think, like 32,000 degrees of input around a circle. But typically, the only time I've ever really seen a POV hat used is for directional input, and D-pads do typically get converted to that, so we'll see. I have to imagine like flight sticks and stuff would not play nice with most of my code, but sorry. So left is negative, right is positive. That makes sense. Sometimes the vertical inputs aren't what I expect. You know, like up might be positive, down might be negative. Every device is a little bit different. There's no way to entirely account for those, and that's one of the many reasons I support input binding, is because it kind of takes some of the pressure off me to have to like hard code all of those fix-ups myself. Alright, let's see, left stick, right stick, what would those be? I don't think I use those anywhere in Gunmetal Arcadia, so I don't have examples. I guess back or select is button 9, which is index 8, so I assume button 10 is going to be start. And again, this is following Logitech conventions. So that should be back and start. Shoulder buttons, I don't use those either. Probably should have a Logitech device with me so I can actually verify these. I believe, so I guess they would be 5, 6, 7, 8. Going to assume these are 5 and 6, which means that bumpers would probably be 7 and 8. I don't know that for 100% certain. I'll have to test that later, but that seems reasonable. I guess I should probably close all of these too. Let's see. So I guess probably I was talking about needing to reconcile differences between direct input and X input devices here. This may actually only be necessary for direct input devices. Because if you're using an X input device, which would be like an Xbox 360 controller or an Xbox One controller, those should behave identically on any platform. The only issue, I guess, would be if you have some sort of software on your machine that's supposed to convert direct input to X input, then it might not necessarily match up correctly. But any sort of software like that, I would hope, would already have the ability to do its own remappings. So I may not need to worry about that. Because yeah, any sort of device that is sort of natively recognized as an X input device, whether it is actually, you know, an Xbox 360 controller, an Xbox One controller, or even Logitech makes devices now where you can switch them between X input and direct input modes. Anything like that should already just naturally match up to what X input expects. So there would be no reason to have to do this sort of glyph remapping for those devices. This is really an artifact of the fact that direct input devices don't have that sort of consistency, especially once you start dealing with different vendors, you know, dealing with devices running through adapters and stuff like that. So what I might do then is just like have this glyph wizard disappear when you select an X input device, but I can cross that bridge when I come to it. Anyway, so here we're looking at A, B, X, Y, up, down, left, right, left stick, right stick, back, start, left bumper, right bumper. Okay, so come down here where we were before. We have, excuse me, I should have delete that one thing. Is that the okay, so A button. By default, A button would be button index 1. I've said no, it's actually button index 2. So that's an easy remapping to make. Let's move on to something more different. 2 and 1, okay, so those are swapped back the other way. 0 and 3, 3 and 0. Alright, here's where things get interesting, because now I'm saying that for D-pad up, by default I want to think of this as an axis. Which axis is it? It's the joystick POV hat Y axis, and it has an axis speed of -1, so it's, you know, negative on that axis, meaning I'm pushing up on the D-pad. And here I'm saying, oh, no, I think that's button index 13, which matches what I saw in the Windows, smashed my finger, that matches what I saw in the Windows game controllers interface, where the D-pad was buttons 13 through 16, so that would be indices 12 through 15. So yeah, I'm saying that's button 12, 14 is down, 15 is left, 13 is right. I guess that's the same as what I was seeing in the Windows games controller. But yeah, so in this case, I would need to be saying this is more than just changing button indices. This is actually taking what I was thinking of as an axis, but now I'm saying no, that's actually a button instead. So that I mean, that may still translate naturally, because I do think this is probably going to only affect, what was it, input name? Yeah, it's probably only going to affect this one function here. Probably what I'll do is, like, this function will just become a wrapper around something else where, or I'll just put a check here first where it says, like, do I have some translation for this? And regardless of whether it's an axis or a button, regardless of what axis or what button it is, it can look up and say, oh, hey, the player has requested to translate this differently. And that should just work. Yeah, I mean, that feels like it should work. That sort of depends on my bindings sort of being consistent with the Logitech conventions, which I probably need to actually like write those down somewhere, because I just happen to have these comments here that was telling me that, but otherwise it's like, well, it's just joystick button 2, and what does that even mean? So I probably need to standardize those somewhere within my own engine, and if they happen to match Logitech's defaults, cool, but they don't necessarily have to. I'm going to take a break for a couple minutes, get some more coffee, and I will be back hopefully to figure out how this is going to work in a few minutes. It's funny how stepping away from the code for a few minutes can clear things up. I realized it would be arbitrarily easy to allow this to work with either X input or direct input devices. All I would need to do is, before I add these mappings, this is what I want. No. I think that's what I want. Somewhere I should have a test that's basically asking, like, is the player currently using an X input device? And I believe that will answer that question. So, yeah, what I can do is just I'll leave a to-do for myself there. But all I would do is, rather than queuing up all these joystick inputs, I would queue up a whole bunch of X input inputs, and it should do exactly the same thing, where it will run through all the glyphs, and it will have the bindings that it expects, and you can provide your own bindings essentially in response to those, and the translations should be the same, all else being equal. Yeah. The one other thing that I would like here, I would like to be able to know vendor and product IDs for the active device, and I don't remember whether I actually cache that off anywhere. The reason I want that is so that once I've made these changes, I can save them to memory, but also save them to file, and be able to associate those remappings with that one device in particular. So if you plug in a different device, you know, maybe one that does just work out of the box, it won't be stomping over things with whatever you've set up there. For instance, I'm using this one particular adapter right now that translates D-pad to buttons 13 through 16. If I were to switch over to this adapter instead, suddenly the D-pad would no longer work, or the glyphs would not be correct, or something would break, because like that's specific to that one particular adapter. And because the vendor ID and product ID are going to be coming from the adapter itself and not from the controller, I would be able to distinguish between those two cases. So, let's see. I guess I will cross that bridge later, dealing with, you know, saving these changes to file. But for starters, I'm just going to try to get the translation working. So, let's see, input naming. Let's see, where is this get string function from? Get display string. I'm assuming, yeah, get display string. It calls get string. It checks whether it needs markup, which it needs markup if it's a button glyph. Otherwise, it could just be, you know, like a letter on the keyboard or something. I'm going to assume this is the only place that gets called from, but I don't know that for 100% certain. Let's see what this is. Input binding. Of course, the the function is defined in input binding with, or it's declared an input binding with defined in input naming. So I can't just hit Alt O to go between those, or to go from this one back, because there's no matching header. I don't know what I was thinking there. Let me call this get string inner. No, here's a good test of whether I call that from anywhere else, because if I do, stuff is going to break. It seems like that's fine. What I'm going to do in the meantime is add another function called getStringOuter. And this will be called from getDisplayString. And for starters, it will just return the inner. Actually, what I really want to do is okay, so it doesn't like using this casting this to a const reference. Interesting. Okay, I don't need to do that anyway. I'll just do that. Let's see. Now the question is, where do these translations need to live? Because this is where I would look up a translation and see, like, okay, does this input actually represent something else at this point? Actually, this is not going to be good code, and this is not going to be where I'm going to leave this permanently, but for starters, I'm just going to make how do I want to do this? Going to put a static array here. There is absolutely no chance that will stay there permanently, because that would be a terrible, terrible idea, but so then this is also going to be bad. I would really like to be able to put this in a map. I can't put it in a map yet unless I implement a less than greater than operator for the defined input class. But yeah, spinning through all of these translations anytime I want to get the string, that's going to be kind of ugly. I could cache off some changes here, maybe to make it a little bit faster, but I really need to just find a better way to do this. This is really, really just for prototyping. Let's see. If translations default input equals translated, then translated equals translations new input. Oops. Well, let's see, how do I want to do this? Yeah, these both kind of depend on each other, don't they? Does this need to be defined to use it in a vector? I'm not sure. Apparently it doesn't. Okay, so I need to make sure that's public if it's not already. Okay, it is public. So then what I'll do is find input, clear, find input. Oh, I just realized I did something else silly. Which is, I didn't define this static in there. Oh, of course it worked. Alright, so then also it would be nice if this had a constructor. Translation. New input. Alright. That should do the trick. Actually, that alone may close the loop. I'll need to run it and see what happens, but that may get me all the way there. For this one very specific case. Will take a long time to compile this time because I made changes to header files in a library somewhere, so it needs to recompile that library, it needs to recompile everything else that uses that library, so yeah. This one will take a little bit of time. The nice thing about this too is like, if this all pans out correctly and I am able to associate these changes with vendor and product IDs, what I could actually do is then go through every device that I own, and anywhere that the input isn't exactly what I expect, I can make those changes and then actually ship those changes with the game as like, default remappings. So, 99% of users hopefully would never have to deal with going through this wizard. They would just use whatever device they have, and it would not only have the remappings done, but I could even specify which glyph set to use by default. So, yeah. That might not necessarily work for this controller, but for others, it could say like, oh, well, I know that you're using something that's supposed to be like, a PlayStation controller, or supposed to be like an Xbox controller, so I could use those glyph sets by default and remap any buttons that are not by default matching my own conventions or Logitech's conventions. Yeah, ship those with the game, and yeah. Well, so see if this first step works, but that would definitely be a nice end goal. At some point too, I need to also go back and figure out what I'm doing with button glyphs for the Xbox One controller, because I do support Xbox One. The version of Gunmetal Arcadia 0 that shipped with Humble Monthly has a problem where it doesn't use the correct glyphs for the Xbox One controller. But I've fixed that since then, and so it mostly works. And the only problem is like the back and start glyphs don't make sense because the Xbox One controller doesn't have back and start. It has like menu and whatever they call the other one. So I need to like make new glyph sets just with new art for that controller specifically, because apparently it's becoming a popular choice. I think. I'm not sure about the DualShock 4, because like I allow the share button to be bound, which is probably okay because on a PC it's just treated like any other button. But it is a little strange because like on the PS4 you never use the share button for anything except sharing. And I'm wondering if like maybe I need to remap that too, so that anything that would sort of be bound to that back or select button by default instead gets bound to like the touchpad button. Which on PC the touchpad button is only treated as a single button press. On PS4 you can like detect is it pressed on the left side, is it pressed on the right side, that sort of thing. I assume it can be used as an actual touchpad where it tracks motion, but you can't. As far as I know, you can't do any of that on PC. It is literally just a binary Boolean on-off button, like any other. So, I don't know. I may need to remap some of those things by default. Man, this compile is taking a long time. Time to switch back to the compiling XKCD comic. Oh, I think I forgot to mention it too. This whole concept with the glyph remappings and stuff. I was planning to do some like UI menu work today, implement like checkboxes and spinners and other sorts of standard widgets that I've needed for a long time and don't have for whatever reason. But yeah, this morning I knew that this thing was a problem because like I said, I've been just adhering to the Logitech conventions for years and just sort of hoping that covers a majority of players. But I had the idea this morning that because my next game is going to be sort of a PlayStation 1 inspired, I was like, oh, wouldn't it be fun to demo that game with an actual PlayStation controller? So like when I take it to events like RTX or whatever, I could actually have a PlayStation controller there. And I was like, well, I have the adapter, that would all work correctly, right? And then I was like, oh, but the glyphs are going to be wrong, and that just fundamentally breaks the entire thing. So yeah, it would have been nice to have this feature too last year when I was showing Super Win the game and using the Super NES gamepad, because the names are the same as the Xbox Xbox 360 controllers. It's A, B, X, and Y, but they're in different places, so the glyphs weren't matching what buttons you were actually supposed to press, and so like people were playing the game and going like, well, it's telling me to press A to jump, and I'm pressing A and it's not doing anything. I was like, oh yeah, that's that's a problem. Alright, so let's see, let's do this one more time. A, B, X, Y, up, down, left, right, stick, back, start, left bumper, right bumper. Okay, so now we have this in-defined inputs translations. We should spin through that a whole bunch of times. Now when I go to bindings, and reset all these default first. Oh, okay, that's not what I'm expecting to see. Why is that? Okay, so the buttons are still doing what they were doing in the past. They're not working the way that I want them to work. But on top of that, the the bindings are not showing what I expect them to be showing. Secondary. See, these two are showing what I expect now, because the secondary weapon, the sub-weapon, that actually is happening now when I press square, and I am throwing bombs when I press X. But these should be showing circle for jump and triangle for primary, because those are the buttons I actually have to press to make those work now, and it seems like it should understand that. You know what, I'm going to go through the wizard again, just so I can validate the input here. It would be nice if TweetDeck would stop crashing. Let's see, where was I? Oh, okay, let's try that again. Okay, so A button. It's expected to be button 1. I'm saying it's button 2. 2 and 1 are swapped. 0 and 3. 3 and 0. That makes sense and looks correct. Oh, goodness. I forgot to put the you only need to translate it once, because what was happening was it was saying, okay, this button is now this button, and then it was hitting the next translation saying, oh, but this one is now this one, so it was going back to what it had before. I only need to translate it once. So hopefully now this will work correctly. In fact, there's almost no chance this won't work correctly, but I'm still going to step through it just to be certain. Alright, A, oops, I hit the wrong button. A, B, X, Y, up, down, left, right stick, back, start, left bumper, right bumper. Okay. Now when I go to bindings, okay, jump is on circle, primary is on triangle, secondary is on square, bomb is on X. Okay, so that matches what is actually happening when I press the buttons. Now, the next step would be to understand that the way I set up the default bindings, is intended to be a certain controller configuration, that I care more about the placement on the face of the gamepad as opposed to the button index. So then I would need to sort of map these in reverse and say, alright, so on this particular controller, you know, these indices are a certain way, but I actually need to translate that back to what it was. I may or may not consider that to be within the scope of this problem. What I should be able to do now is say, okay, jump, press X, yes. Primary, press square, yes. Secondary, press triangle, bomb, press circle. Okay, so now the buttons that I was pressing on the face here map correctly to what is showing up here, and if I go back to the game, I press X, I jump, I press square, I use my attack, I press circle, I throw a bomb, I press triangle, I throw a knife. Okay, so that's all working correctly now. So the translations are happening as intended. So that's sort of the first part done. This is, as I said, it's all happening sort of at the visual level. I'm not actually changing what inputs are being pressed under the hood. What I'm saying is that I had some expectation that a glyph was associated with a particular input, and now I provide new information that says that glyph needs to be associated with a different input instead. So that probably gets me, like, you know, 90% of the way there. I would like to make this work for X input devices. I would like to make this work, possibly work, sort of work backwards so that whatever default bindings I provide, it can understand that those need to be sort of remapped for whatever device you're using so that you don't have to actually go through and rebind all those. I'd like to associate this with vendor IDs and product IDs so that I can save and load these translations. I need to actually save and load the translations. I need to find a better place to put the translations because that static array is ugly. Trying to think if there was anything else that I was wanting to do with this that I haven't gotten around to yet. I feel like that's probably the majority of it. But, oh, I guess too, like right now I just, you know, when I go into the wizard, it's just literally saying the names of the glyphs. So it's just saying A, B, X, Y here. I need to actually display the glyph there. Probably what I will do too is like show the glyph as it would appear on the Xbox 360 controller and on the DualShock controller. Because, you know, what I care about is the position on the faceplate, not any particular input. So I can say, you know, triangle and Y button. Push the button on your own gamepad that corresponds to either of these. So I'm caring about the top button in that case. Yeah, that feels like it should work with pretty much anything. But yeah, that's probably most of the work that's left to do. You know, vendor and product IDs are going to be the big one. I should be able to, actually, you know what? I may already have that ability. Yeah, here. So if I say set input show device goods 1, and then back out of this menu and come back in. Alright, so I'll change the resolution so it's a little bit easier to read. So these device GUIDs here, this is the first 4 characters I believe is the vendor ID, the second 4 characters is the product ID, and then this these characters after the underscore is just a flag that I'm appending on my own that indicates whether it's an X input device, and if it is, what index X input device is. So for instance, this is the first X input device. This one's not an X input device at all, so it's just using, you know, FF invalid flag. But yeah, so I should, you know, somewhere in my code, I should have enough information to tell what vendor and product ID I'm currently using, just by looking at this sort of thing, if nothing else, and, you know, save off translations on a per device basis. Yeah, I need to clean up this interface too, because like having these, you know, backgrounds under each of these things is looking really bad. But I think I'm gonna go ahead and call this stream, call it a day for today. Yeah, hopefully this was fun to watch. I'll probably do the menu UI stuff, the checkbox widgets and spinners and all that stuff. Maybe I'll do that next month. But yeah, thank you for watching. As always, this series, my video series, and these streams as well, is supported through Patreon. Shout out to Patreon contributors Benjamin, Jace, and Opa and Nana for their contributions. You can find the links to my Patreon at gunmetalarcadia.com. I also post weekly development blogs there. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.